Nothing stays the same forever, which brings us on to our third topic today. Didier Deschamps, there are those in France who thought he would be the coach of the French team forever and ever.
I mean, he has been.
Yeah, he has, to be fair to.
I think when I was watching France versus Portugal in the Euros, I thought it was going to go on forever and ever.
Apart from the Euros this last year, apart from that, he has been relatively successful, though. You know, let's give him his dues, etc. The time for his departure seems to have been long overdue, with all the issues with, you know, Kylian Mbappe and all the players and him, etc. It seems like Deschamps has stayed a little bit too long, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And what he's done is he's announced this week in a television interview that when his contract expires in 2026, he will not seek an extension. So he's leaving after the 2026 World Cup, at which point he'll have been in charge for 14 years.
That's amazing.
Which is incredible, really. And when you think of everything he's put in as a player, of course, he was there when they won the World Cup in 1998, and as a coach as well, is pretty remarkable. But I guess that putting some sort of definitive end to it feels as if it's very significant and very important. Because you're right, France and Deschamps have really run aground, I think, since ever since the final of the 2022 World Cup. Now, maybe, and it seems ridiculous to say, but this is the way football is, if they'd have won that penalty shootout instead of lost it in Qatar against Argentina, maybe we'd be looking at things completely differently. But the fact that they didn't quite get that over the line in the final, I think enables it to be looked at a little bit more soberly. And I think everything that's happened since, so the poor Euros, the difficulties that Kylian Mbappe's had, the relationship with Antoine Griezmann that's led to him quitting, loads of other things. But then again, when you put those things in the last year and a half, like lay them out like that, you sort of go wider and look at all the other things that he's had to deal with in those coming up to 13, will be by the end of the contract 14 years. It's remarkable that he's provided the level of surety that he has, despite the fact he's obviously had unbelievable players to call on, and that he's managed to continue, because a lot of things that have happened during his tenure would have finished off a lot of other coaches, a lot of other countries. And, you know, you think of the Benzema Valbuena thing. There are so many other things that have happened in that time and that he's managed to get past. And, you know, I think you always look, when you think of the French national team's potential for mutiny, you look at the 2010 World Cup and everything that happened in South Africa, which was the nadir of the French national team. And yet nothing like that's happened to him. It's felt like there have been moments when it could have happened for him, and he's managed to ride it out, and it's very, very impressive. Now, I think when you think of Deschamps' ability to survive, that is why it's important to say this now, because you've got big targets coming up. You've got the Nations League with the two-legged quarterfinal, of course, because of the reformatting. They've never been beaten in a quarterfinal of the Nations League, Nicky, to go back to the historical moments of the game, and then they're going to try and win the Nations League, and then you've got the World Cup, which is obviously is clap de fin in 2026. It's felt to me, as I've discussed on here,
is that clap de fin?
Yeah.
Qu'est-ce que c'est, s'il vous plaît?
It's over.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oui, je comprends. Oui, oui.
And I think it's felt to me, as I've said on here in recent months, they will not win the World Cup as things stand. I just think it's just a bit of a mess. And this is, I guess, the last sort of effort to say, okay, right, Deschamps is going to be over soon. Let's all concentrate on his victory lap and doing as well as we can and getting as close as we can to these titles.
And you think the players have, because it seems like from the last 2 tournaments at least, he's had difficulty with players. Do you think the players will be up for giving him a clap de fin?
Well, maybe they'll be up for him going, or some of them will anyway. I think it's maybe the thought is it's easier to focus and energise when you know that it's a finite period.
It's such a long finite period.
Yes.
It's a really...
Even for international football?
I think even more so for international football, because I think when you look at international football, yes, there's not that many games, but that's almost the point. Every footballer who aspires to play for their national team, at the very, very best, they're going to maybe be able to be playing at a level, and this is a tiny pot of players who could say this, playing at a level that could make them good enough to be there 4 tournaments, 4 World Cups, like in total. So if you think you're giving up a World Cup so your manager can have a victory tour, when I say giving it up, I don't mean not being there, but if you think it's not giving you the best chance to win it, and we know France can win it, that's a lot actually. That's a huge window in your career. Where that won't be a thing. Now, I think it's premature to say they can't win it with Deschamps. I'm certainly not saying that. And I actually fall slightly on the side of, hang on a second. I mean, I just made the joke earlier about how incredibly boring they were at the Euros. They still went to the semi-finals of the Euros. Everyone says they had a terrible Euros. They went to the semi-final and they actually were in that semi-final for most of it. It was rubbish because they scored 1 goal from open play in the whole tournament and their top goal scorer was own goal, but they still weren't out there getting beaten by people. And yes, the other two World Cups, won a World Cup, went to the final of one, lost it on penalties. I don't know that you can ask that much more.
But that's why you expected the Euros to be better for them, wasn't it? Because of that.
But I just think people look at it and go, oh, he's got Mbappe, of course he can do those things. Neymar never won a World Cup. Neymar never even won a Copa America. So, like, you can have great players and not win the thing. Like, so I do think you can underestimate how good he's been. But I also think if you are just calling it a farewell tour that takes a World Cup in is beyond indulgent.
But I think it's about sort of finding that way to go back to where he originally was. Like, because the whole of Deschamps' story as a coach, as a head coach with France, has been about pulling it out of an impossible situation. If you go back to them qualifying for the World Cup...
Who's it for, Andy? This is the question.
For everyone.
Is it for anyone except for Deschamps?
No, I think it's for everyone. I think it's to say, all this stuff that's gone on, bygones be bygones, we know we're good enough to win it, let's go and win it. I think, it simplifies the task in a way. So I think, like, when you go back to late 2013, like November 2013, so this was... His first big thing was to qualify for the World Cup after he took over from Laurent Blanc. You expect them to qualify for the World Cup. They're in this playoff with Ukraine. They lose the first leg out in Kiev 2-0. You think, okay, they're in trouble. But the way that Deschamps, and actually Benzema is a huge part of this, emerges and says, okay, right, we're going to get it together. Everyone in France is really pessimistic about it. We're going to find a way. They win 3-0 at Stade de France and they get to the 2014 World Cup where they're eventually quarter-finalists and they're knocked out by Germany, the eventual winners. But that really set the tone for France under Deschamps, because there are loads of knocks and there are loads of improbable comebacks. So they should have won Euro 2016. Gignac hits the post right at the end. They don't. And yet they go and win the World Cup. And they dig in a lot of places to win the World Cup. There are a lot of moments where it feels like it's going wrong and they find a way. I think you can even go to the 2022 World Cup final and, they're outplayed by Argentina for most of it. Argentina are by far the better team for 70, 75 minutes. And you can say, oh, okay, it's just Mbappe. But actually, it's France finding a way, isn't it?
Although, you must say the last few years of Deschamps' tenure has been maybe overshadowed by a very iconic French figure looking over his shoulder, or
it's
at least
it's a big shadow, and not only because he's over
massive.
6 foot.
Yeah, well, yeah, indeed. So, is it time for Zizi to return to the French camp, but as a coach this time? That's what most football commentators in France are expecting, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that the biggest reaction to Deschamps going is like, yeah, respect, let's give him his flowers. Oh my God, Zidane's coming! it's really interesting in that you know...
Even your eyes lit up there, by the way.
Totally. Because he's just such an icon. And I think that's it. When you look at French football has quite a sort of modest view of itself. You know, it's not chest beating at all. But when the possibility of Zidane, even a year and a half down the line, could take over, everyone's really excited about it. And there's, you know, all these lists in French media. Well, Mbappe's backing him. And, you know, we're really excited about it.
Griezmann's coming back.
Yes, it's that kind of thing. Because Zidane, because of his role in the 98 World Cup at first, because of what he did at Real Madrid as a coach, and because, as you say, Dotun, the whole feeling is that he's just been hanging out for this ever since he left Real Madrid the second time.
Can he make a difference?
We're back to this thing about it's a really long time. It's a really long time until that World Cup is done. It's not quite 2 years, but it's such an amount of time in football that I don't know how to make sense of it. I think it's a question to ask when we get there, but.
It's also, he can't, given that length of farewell, Zinedine Zidane can't start commenting, can he, on the French team? He has to keep his own counsel.
But he's not like that. He won't comment on the French national team when he's actually the coach.
Okay, fair enough.
But I do think that there is a real thing of whether he's speaking or not. In fact, the silence may be what speaks loudest. The shadow of Zidane will now just exist over this team regardless of anything else.
Yeah. But don't you think it has been already? I mean, that was the point that you were making before, wasn't it? Wasn't it, Dotun?
But now it's so definite. Now it's so clear that that's what's happening.
I guess the question for me is, once you strip away all the mystique and all the rest of it, is the fact that if we're making a case for why Zidane will be a great coach for the French national team, it's because of his time in charge of Real Madrid. We think of him as like sort of a light touch, an expert herder of superstars, you know, a whisperer of elite players, if you like.
Yeah.
And that would seem to fit France really well. But like, we've seen a couple fall by the wayside. You know, Giroud retired because of age, obviously, but Griezmann decided to go. Pogba's faded from the picture. And when we've seen them rebuilding, and, you know, when we see that victory, I hate to bring it up again, but the France victory over Italy in Milan, it feels as if the future of France might be slightly less star-led. So by the time, it goes back to your 18 months point, really, by the time he takes over, is the France job still the job that we think it is?
Yeah.
And that much time we can't know, really, can we?
Yeah, I mean,
just to be clear, he hasn't taken over just yet. He hasn't.
No.
Yeah.
But he will, because we're willing it.
Okay,
that's true. No, it won't be the same job it is now, because things will happen and inevitably events have their consequences. But it will still be the France job with Kylian Mbappe, which I know that's oversimplifying it, but it also isn't.
Yeah, it's still
the France job with Kylian Mbappe. Yeah,
it's a convincing point.